האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Toldos. We're going to do Os Aleph, section number 1. Before we start, we're going to look at the first pasuk in Parshas Toldos. Here it comes. Ve'ele Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. And these are the generations of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. Avraham holid es Yitzchak. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. That's the first pasuk. And now let's go right into the Zera Shimshon. Pasuk, the pasuk says, Ve'ele Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. And these are the generations of Yitzchak ben Avraham. Perish Rashi. Rashi explains. Okay. Sorry. Perish Rashi. Rashi explains, Yaakov Esav Ha'amurim B'Parsha. The Toldos of Yitzchak is referring to Yaakov and Esav, who are mentioned in the Parsha. Makshim, the commentators ask, Shedivrei Rashi Haim Lelo Tzorech. These words of Rashi telling us that the generations of Yitzchak is a reference to Yaakov and Esav are not necessary. Rashi doesn't need to tell us that. Shaharei hakosav machris bechayil. Because the pasuk itself, just a few psukim later, announces loudly or announces clearly, v'hinei somim bevitna. There were twins in Rivka's womb. Vayete harishon admoni, and the first one came out all red. Ve'acharei chen yotza achiv, and afterwards the pasuk says his brother came out. So Rashi is saying that, bringing down the commentators who ask a very obvious question on what Rashi says, because Rashi says he identifies who are the generations of Yitzchak, who are the children of Yitzchak. That's a reference to Yaakov and Esav. But if you look just a few psukim later, the birth of Esav and then Yaakov are given to us by the Torah very clearly in detail. So why would Rashi need to tell us that the children of Yitzchak were Yaakov and Esav? V'nireh, and it would appear. Oh, I should mention before we go further, Rashi's going to give us two approaches to answer this question. The first approach is coming now, and it will talk about the fact that Rashi was bothered by two problems in the pasuk that he had with this pasuk, and therefore he said what he had to say, and Zera Shimshon will explain all of that. Then after that, he'll take an entirely different, a second approach, which is entirely different, just so you're aware of what's coming. Venira, it would appear, Rashi hirgish, that Rashi felt that there was a problem. Why? Shekevan dekaimalon, since we hold Kol Mokom Shenemar Ele Posal Es Harishonim. We have a statement by Chazal that in the Torah, if the Torah starts a pasuk with the word Ele, these, it is intended to invalidate or disconnect what's being said with what came before the word Ele. So if the Torah was talking about a certain subject, and then it started a new pasuk with the word Ele, these, we're intended to understand that the previous pasuk has been completed, and the new subject is being discussed with starting with the word Ele. That's the first part of Chazal's statement. However, ve'ele, if the Torah starts a pasuk with and these, mosif al harishonim, then it is intended to add and to continue what was being said before the word ve'ele appeared. Okay? The Kahn, in here, where our parsha starts with the word ve'ele, and these, heim b'nei Yishmael. V'kan harishonim hey b'nei Yishmael. And here, the previous subject that was being talked about, meaning right at the end of the previous parsha of Chayei Sarah, were the children of Yishmael. Eich Omar ve'ele. So how could the Torah use the word ve'ele and these to refer to the children of Yitzchak If previously it was talking about, if directly before that it was talking about the sons of Yishmael, and the word ve'ela is intended to connect the previous subject of the children of Yishmael with the new topic of the sons of Yitzchak. Rashi's assuming that we would be, Zera Shimshon is assuming that we would see that that's an awkward thing to say, because there should normally be no connection whatsoever between the children of Yishmael and the children of Yitzchak. So the Zera Shimshon says that was a problem that Rashi had with our pasuk. And now he's going to bring a second problem that Rashi had. Please keep in mind that these two problems that the Zera Shimshon is going to articulate for us, that he feels that he is suggesting that Rashi had with the pasuk, are brought to us to explain ultimately why Rashi said what he said about the children of Yitzchak being Yaakov and Esau. That's ultimately, keep in mind, that's ultimately what our goal is. In other words, we're going to learn about two problems that Zera Shimshon thinks Rashi had with the pasuk, that then will help us understand why Rashi felt he had to say his statement, which seems unneeded, unnecessary. Okay, here comes the second problem that Rashi had with the pasuk. Ve'od, and another problem, Dika'omar ve'ele toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. The pasuk says, these are the generations of Yitzchak, the son of Avraham. V'chi ad Kahn, and is it true that until here, lo shamanu, we never learned in the Torah, she Yitzchak hu ben Avraham, that Yitzchak was the son of Avraham? Right? Again, why would the Torah need to say that Yitzchak was the son of Avraham? That's obvious information that, of course, we would know on our own, and that bothered Rashi as well. So Rashi had two problems with the pasuk. Lomar, and therefore, based on the two problems that the Zera Shimshon just suggested bothered Rashi, he is now saying that to solve all that in Rashi's mind, the pasuk should have said, Eile toldos Yitzchak v'su lo, and nothing more. The pasuk should not have started with ve'ele, which connected it to the previous subject matter of the children of Yishmael, and it also shouldn't have said after the word Yitzchak ben Avraham, that he was the son of Avraham, because that's something that we know. So according to the Zera Shimshon, Rashi would have been more comfortable with the Torah starting off, with this parsha starting off, Eile toldos Yitzchak, period, as opposed to Ve'eile toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. Rashi had a problem, according to the Zera Shimshon, with the vav at the beginning of the pasuk, and with the words ben Avraham that appear right after it says toldos Yitzchak. Okay, let's continue. Elavadai, but definitely the words ben Avraham lahashmi'enu are coming to teach us shahatolodos shelo, that the generations of Yitzchak hayu kamoso shel Avraham were similar and comparable to Avraham. Lefi she'al yedei osam hatolodos, because through those generations of Yitzchak's children, right? That's Yaakov and Esau. Motza hakedusha makom, holiness, the power of holiness in the world found a place or an opportunity, lehotzi hanitzotzos shelo, to extract its sparks of holiness, mitoch haklipa, from being stuck in the shell of impurity in the world, kimoshe nichtov lekamon besamach, as we will write soon after this piece, al pasuk vayisrotzutzu habonim bekirba, on the words in the pasuk, and the children strived inside of her, meaning Yaakov and Esav as fetuses struggled inside the womb of Rivka, v'ayin sham, and see over there. So the Zera Shimshon tells us he's going to talk more about this issue of kedusha, of holiness, and the sparks of holiness being stuck in the shell of impurity, the powers of impurity in the world, in section Gimel that comes, of course, 2 pieces after this piece. But for our purposes, let's pause for a moment to understand this first point that the Zera Shimshon is making. The first thing he says is that he answers his second point that he says was bothering Rashi. Again, Rashi was bothered by why it says ve'ela with a vav, connecting it to the children of Yishmael, and why it says ben Avraham, that Yitzchak was the son of Avram, which of course we would know. So he answers that first question by saying that in Rashi's mind, the reason it says ben Avraham is because the Torah wanted to teach us that the generations of Yitzchak, Yaakov and Esav, who are going to be mentioned a few psukim later, they are connected to, they can be compared and are comparable to Avraham. So the Toldos Yitzchak are ben Avraham. They are connected through Yitzchak to Avraham, and those generations enable the forces of holiness in the world to extract the sparks of holiness from the tuma, from the powers, from the impure impure forces in the world. And as we've mentioned before, that's a Kabbalistic idea, which the Zera Shimshon has mentioned to us in previous pieces. So at this point, the only question we should have in our mind is Esav really a person who can be referred to as being comparable to Avram Avinu? Is that really what the Zera Shimshon is saying? That not only Yaakov, but Esav as well, because those are the 2 children, the Toldos of Yitzchak, the offspring, the progeny of Yitzchak. Esav too is somehow being compared to Avraham and being comparable, being viewed as connected enough to Avraham that we can say that Esav was part of the process of rescuing the sparks of holiness and extracting them from the tuma, from the impurity. Is that really what's being said? It certainly looks like that's what's being said. And in fact, that is what's being said, as we'll see as we continue. V'zehu sheperish Rashi al pasuk. And this is what Rashi explains on the pasuk that appears again a few psukim later. Shnei goyim bevitnech. The pasuk says that when Rivka went to inquire why she was having so much pain and trouble in childbirth, and why it seemed to her that there was all kinds of turmoil going on inside of her, so she was told, Shnei goyim bevitnech. There are 2 nations inside of your womb. And Rashi comments on that. Elu Antoninus v'Rabi. These 2 nations are epitomized by Antoninus and Rabbi. Antoninus was a Roman statesman, a Roman leader, who was a good friend of Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi. Of course, at the time, this brings us to the time of the Mishnah, Rebbe Yehuda Hanassi, the editor and the redactor of the Mishnah. And the Gemara tells us many stories about the relationship between Rebbe, the leader, of course, of the Jewish people, and Antoninus, a leader of the Romans, and how Antoninus respected Rebbe, and how the 2 got along and treated each other respectfully. So Rashi says that's an example of the 2 nations that were in Rivka's womb. V'lo perish shnei roshe goyim. And Rashi didn't explain on that pasuk that it's a reference to the 2 heads of the different nations, al Yaakov, on Yaakov, top of the next column, ve'esav, and Esav, shehayu haroshim ve'ha'avos l'shtei ha'umos, because Yaakov and Esav were, of course, each the ancestor of, or the patriarch of, the families that extended from them, that continued on after them. Yaakov, the patriarch of the Jewish people, and Esav, the patriarch of the nation of Edom. So Rashi did not say that that's what the pasuk was referring to when it talked about the two nations struggling inside of Rivka. Instead, Rashi brought the example of Antonidas and Rebbe as descendants of Yaakov and Esau. Ume'ata shapir mikru shnehem toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. And from now we can understand how the Torah could refer to both Yaakov and Esav. I mean, we can understand how Esav can be included as one of the generations that came from Yitzchak, as one of the offspring that came from Yitzchak, ben Avraham, and connected back to Avram. Shehatolodos sheyavo'u machmas ibura shel Rivka. What the Torah is saying is not that Esav was a tzaddik, but that there would be descendants from Esav who existed in the world going back to the pregnancy of Rivka, now talked about in our parsha, Dahainu hashnei goyim shahayu bevitna, and these descendants came from the two nations that were in a side of Rivka at the time. Yiyu kamoso shel Avraham. They would ultimately be like Avraham. Okay, so let's pause to make sure we understand this point. What the Zera Shimshon is saying is that Rashi, again, all of this that we're discussing is how Rashi learned our pasuk. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that Rashi looked at the words Yitzchak ben Avraham, and he said the only way to understand why the Torah felt the need to say ben Avraham is if it wanted to teach us an amazing lesson, something we would not ever have said on our own in all likelihood, and that is that the two children of Yitzchak, Yaakov and Esav, were connected back to Avraham, were legitimately children of Yitzchak ben Avraham, the son of Avraham. These were grandchildren that could be connected back to Avraham. And if you ask, as we did, the obvious question that how could that be said about Esav? So Zera Shimshon has just explained to us that it wasn't a reference to Esav per se, but rather it was a reference to the fact that there would be future descendants of Esav's who would be righteous. For example, Antonidas, who was so righteous that he honored and esteemed Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi in the time of the Mishnah. And there would be others. There would be other people in the generations and lines that came from Esav in the nation of Edom that would be righteous people. And those people, those members of the nation of Edom, of Esav, could be connected back to Avraham Avinu. Umikol makom, nevertheless, kosav ve'ele lahosif ala rishonim. Now Zera Shimshon turns his attention back to the first problem that he said Rashi have, which was with the word ve'ele. And the point that was made there was why would the Torah connect Yitzchak's children to the children of Yishmael, who we assume were very wicked and very evil? Why would the Torah ever make that connection? So the Zera Shimshon says, Lefi, because Shegami Yaakov Yotzu Rishayim. The Torah is telling us that even from Yaakov in the future, there would be wicked people. Kidisnan, as the Mishnah in Masechet Sanhedrin teaches us, Ve'elu she'ein lohem chelek le'olam haba. The Mishnah says there are Jews, even though we have a foundational principle, which is Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek le'olam haba. All members of the Jewish people have a share in the world to come. The Mishnah states that there are some Jewish people who, because of their actions, lose their portion in the world to come and can be called Rishoyim. The Esav Hayahu Atzmo Russia, and Esav himself was the Russia. So the Zera Shimshon is saying that there is a kind of tension or balance being taught to us here by the Torah in this one pasuk, which is the first pasuk in Parshas Toldot, and it's telling us, don't assume that everything is black and white in terms of Yaakov and Esav, the children of Yitzchak. Don't assume that Yaakov is the totally righteous one who will have only righteous descendants, and Esav is the totally wicked one who will have only wicked descendants. No, the Torah is coming to tell you that there are going to be exceptions on both counts, meaning Ve'ela teaches us that you can connect Yaakov and Esav to the children of Yishmael, who are kind of being used here as a paradigm of wickedness. And they're connected because even amongst the children and descendants of Yaakov, there will be Rishayim, and Esav himself was a Rasha. So therefore you see that it's appropriate to connect Yaakov and Esav to Bnei Yishmael, but don't stop there, because look at from the other perspective, both Yaakov and Esav are considered worthy of being connected to Avraham. Yaakov in his own merits, and of course the merits of his children and the future generations of Klal Yisrael, for the most part in general, and Esav because there will even be righteous descendants coming from Esav in the future, and so there's holiness there too in his line of descendants, or we could say there are sparks of holiness too in the descendants of Esav. So with that explanation, we see how the two problems that bothered Rashi were understood according to the Zera Shimshon by Rashi, what those things were teaching us in Rashi's mind. Now we're continuing. Vikara hatolodos b'shem Avraham, and the pasuk is calling the descendants of Yitzchak in the name of Avraham, lefi shahayahu techila lagerim, because Abraham was considered the first convert and kind of the father of Gerim, the father of converts. Uchsiv, and the pasuk says about Abraham, ki av hamon goyim nisaticha, because a father of multitudes of the nations I have placed you. Abraham's role in this world was to teach about Hashem and monotheism and the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, of course, to the people of the world, not just to his children and not just to the members of his household, but to the people of the world, to spread the message of monotheism and the appropriate values that went along with that, to spread that to the people of the world, which, of course, if people listened to him and became students of Abraham, they would want to convert and join him. Dahainu she'Avraham tikein ruchonios hagerim. This means that for all time, Avraham is viewed as the individual who repaired and established the spirituality for Gerim. It's almost as if Avraham made a mold for Gerus, for the idea of conversion, because he led the way from forsaking Avodah Zarah, for forsaking the idol worship that he had seen and participated in his father Terach's household. And he led the way of converting from that to returning and converting to a life of recognizing Hashem and serving Hashem. So Avram is the paradigm for all future converts, all future Gerim. V'himshicha min haklipa, and he pulled their souls from the impure shell, the powers of impurity in the world, shahayu ashukim ba, that they were stuck in it, they were imprisoned in it, and it took a man with the spiritual power of an Avram Avinu to pull them out from that type of situation. As we have written previously, the Zera Shimshon says, Al pasuk v'hu yoshev pesach ha'ohel, on the pasuk of Abraham sitting at the opening of his tent, v'ayin sham, and you can see there. Aval adayin, but still, even though we know of the specialness of Abraham, it took further preparation and thought in order to take them out completely. Meaning, even though you can refer to Abraham as the father of Gerim, and even though we now have been taught about his unprecedented ability to teach people and inspire people who were stuck in the world of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry and entombment and impurity, and to extract them from there, Nonetheless, that was a long process. That wasn't something that just happened quickly and was over. That was the beginning of a long process. And therefore, what the Zera Shimshon is hinting to is that there were still very powerful forces of tumah, of impurity, and that explains the connection between Yaakov and Esav and even their descendants back to Yishmael, which was indicated with the word ve'ela, as the Zera Shimshon has already explained. So up until here, the Zera Shimshon has used his first approach to explain the words that Rashi used on the Parsha. And now he's going to move to an entirely new approach when looking at the issue. So let's remind ourselves of what the issue is that we started with, because we've covered a lot of ground in the few paragraphs that we've learned together. The original issue was that Rashi, on our first pasuk of Ve'ela Toldos Yitzchak ben Avram, Rashi says, who are the Toldos of Yitzchak? They are Yaakov and Esav, Ha'amurim b'Parsha, who are discussed in this Parsha of Parshas Toldos. And of course, the question was, why would Rashi ever need to say that when we know a few psukim later, it tells us that those are the children of Yitzchak and Rivka. So why did Rashi need to say that? That's the question that he's already given one somewhat complicated answer to, and now he's going to move into, in the next paragraph, he's going to begin his second approach. Inami, alternatively, bederech acher, in a different way. There's a different way of understanding what Rashi was referencing to or responding to. Unedayek, and here we need to pay close attention, mahu zeh shekosav ha'amurim b'parsha, what it was that Rashi wrote in his comment when he said ha'amurim b'parasha, that they, meaning Yaakov and Esav, are talked about in the parsha. We need to give close attention as a starting point or a jumping off point to what did Rashi mean by saying that? Why didn't Rashi just say, who are the generations of Yitzchak? They're Yaakov and Esav, period. Why did he say Yaakov and Esav, who are talked about in this parsha? Shaharei Kahn miyad b'samoch ne'emru. Rashi didn't need to say they're talked about in this parsha because just a few psukim later, immediately after the first pasuk, close by to the first pasuk, Nemru, they're talked about. So Rashi must have meant something different when he said Yaakov and Esav, who are talked about in this parsha. It must not just have been Yaakov and Esav who were mentioned in a few psukim. It must mean there's something that happens later in the parsha that Rashi is alluding to and wants us to be aware of, wants us to connect to his words. Shehine kosfu hamaforshim, because there are meforshim who wrote shebekan hoyu echad tzadik ve'echad rasha, that Yaakov and Esav being born to Yitzchak and Rivka was strange, was unusual, because one of them was a tzaddik and one of them was a rasha. And why would that be that such righteous people as Yitzchak and Rivka would give birth to one tzaddik and one rasha? We would expect their children, their two children, to both be exceedingly pious, righteous people. And so some commentators say, Lefi sheYitzchak haya tzaddik bin tzaddik, it's because Yitzchak was not just a tzaddik, he was the tzaddik, the son of a tzaddik. V'Rivka hayasa bas rasha, but Rivka, who was a great tzaddikas, was the daughter of a rasha, of a wicked person. So these, according to these commentators, the reason Yitzchak and Rivka had one son who was righteous and one son who was wicked is because the merit of Yitzchak, who was a tzaddik ben tzaddik, a righteous man, the son of a righteous man, could produce a tzaddik like Yaakov. But Rivka, whose merits were a righteous person, but the daughter of a wicked person, was, of course, very involved in producing Yaakov, the tzaddik, but also had a child who was a rasha, namely Esav. That's what some commentators say. But the Zera Shimshon is not happy with that explanation. V'koshe al zeh. There's a real problem with this explanation. Shaharei Avraham holides Yitzchak. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak, shahaya tzaddik, who was a tzaddik. V'Avraham v'Sara lo hayu b'nei tzaddikim. But Abraham and Sarah were not the children themselves of tzaddikim. Sheterach v'horon hoyu ovdei avodah zara. As we just mentioned a moment ago, Terach, Abraham's father, and Haran, who was Abraham's brother and was Sarah's father, hoyu ovdei avodah zara. They were idol worshippers, and they were not righteous people. Ve'af Kahn, and even so, hoyu yucholim liyo shnehem tzaddikim. And they, Abraham and Sarah, even though their grandparents, who were they were able to give birth to a tzaddik like Yitzchak. So too here, Yitzchak and Rivka should have been able to bring forth two tzaddikim. Yaakov and Esav should have been both been righteous people, according if we're connecting them to the merits of their parents. So the question remains, why was only one of them a righteous person and one of them a rasha? So here the Zera Shimshon has laid the groundwork and set up the new approach that he wants to take by letting us know that a fundamental question that some Meforshim discuss here is, why did Yitzchak and Rivka have only one child who was a rasha and one child who was why did they have one child who was a tzaddik and one child who was a rasha instead of having two children who were both righteous? That's some Meforshim asked that question. And the Zera Shimshon says, I'll tell you what some of them answer. Then he rejects that answer based on what happened with Abraham and Sarah, and they're giving birth to Yitzchak, the great tzaddik. And now he says, what he's going to do is develop a new answer to that question, which will also help go back and explain the first Rashi. Ela yesh lomar, but we can say, shemisipur harparasha, from all of the story of our parsha of Toldos, Onu lemedim, we learn shahatam shebou habrachos leYaakov b'mirma. The reason that the blessings from Yitzchak at the end of his life, the reason they had to come to Yaakov b'mirma, through deceit, through trickery, af al pi sheru'uyos hayu lo yoser me'esav, even though it was fitting for the blessings to come to Yaakov much more than to Esav. If the blessings should have by right come to Yaakov, why would Hashem set things up in such a way that Esav is born first, and he starts off with the Bechora, the right of the firstborn, and then later Yitzchak is planning to give him the blessings at the end of Yitzchak's life? Why was all that necessary? And so Yaakov constantly has to be on guard to trick Esav, and then later to trick his father in order to get the brachos. Why was all that necessary? Lefi shelo rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Hashem did not want sheyovu habrachos leYaakov, that the blessings would come to Yaakov bishalva vehashket, in a tranquil and quiet or easy, comfortable way. Hashem did not want that. Meaning, it was Hashem's plan, of course, all along, that Yaakov Avinu would receive the right of the firstborn, the Bechora, and he would receive the brachos from his father. However, Hashem did not want those things to come easily to Yaakov. Shelo yehaneh kol kach me'ha'olam hazeh, in order that Yaakov Avinu's pleasure and joy in this world should not be so great. Kedei sheyizkel olam haba, in order that he would merit more of a reward in the next world. Hashem did not want Yaakov's path and journey through this world to be such that when he came to olam haba, Hashem didn't want there to be even an iota. He didn't want there to be anything missing from Yaakov Avinu's full reward in the next world. And that might have happened had Yaakov Avinu had an easy and comfortable and a joyous life in this world. So instead, Hashem devised difficulties and challenges for Yaakov in this world, in Olam Hazeh. Umishum hachi gilgel HaKadosh Baruch Hu es hamasid, and therefore Hashem developed the events in our parsha, Yaakov vizaru lo yehanu babrachos, that Yaakov and his children would not get the benefit of the blessings, ela b'de'oga uvamora, except through worry and through fear, uvesinoso shel Esav, and they would have to deal with the enmity of Esav, Kemosha nichtov lekomon b'makomo, as we will write later, the Zera Shimshon says, in its proper place, which is a later a later section on Parshas Toldos. Ubishvil zeh hotzi mi Yitzchak Yaakov ve'Esav, and this is the real reason why Yitzchak and Rivka had Yaakov and Esav, a righteous son and a wicked son. Sheyisgoru beinehem, that they would fight between them, they would quarrel between them. V'lo yiyeh shalom v'hashket leYaakov, and there would not be peace and quiet for Yaakov. Uchadei shetiskayim habechira shel Avraham, and in addition to Yaakov's, Hashem wanting Yaakov's path in this world and life in this world to be one of challenge and one of difficulty, in addition to that, in order to increase and magnify his reward in the next world, in addition to that, it was intended shetiskayim, that there should be fulfilled habechira shel Avraham, a choice that Avraham made, sheberer hagolios livnei Yaakov, because he chose that there would be exile for the children, exiles in the future of the descendants of Yaakov, instead of Gehenna. And we need to pause to understand the reference that the Zera Shimshon is referring to. As you can see in the parentheses, it comes from Bereshis Rabbah. It comes from a statement, actually a concept that's developed in the Medrash Rabbah. And the story we are told there is that Hashem presented Avraham with a choice. And he said that in the future, because of the sins of the Jewish people at different times, in different periods in history, they would have to undergo suffering. And Hashem said to Avram, I'm going to give you the choice. Would you prefer that their suffering be experiencing golus, exile in this world, and all of the pain and suffering that comes with that? Or would you want them to be free of the punishment of exile in this world and experience their suffering and their pain in after this world and Gehenna? And Avraham chose that the Jewish people should be spared Gehenna and experience any suffering that they had to undergo in this world through exile, through Golios, through the exiles that the Jewish people have experienced at different times in their history. And so that is also connected to why Yaakov and Esav were born, why Yaakov was paired and twinned literally with a wicked brother, in order that that quarrel should take place, and in order that ultimately one of the exiles that the Jewish people would have is the exile caused by Edom, the descendants of Esav, and that represents all of the exiles, and that connected all the way back to this choice that Avraham made. And now the Zera Shimshon is going to put everything in this second approach together. Ve'hein hein divrei Rashi, and these now are the way to properly understand the words of Rashi. Yaakov ve'Esav ha'amurim ba'parosha, Yaakov and Esav, who are spoken about in this parsha, klomar, that means to say, lefi sheYitzchak hoya ben Avraham. Why did the pasuk have to say Yitzchak was the son of Avraham? The Avraham Beirer Hagolos. Avraham is the one who chose the punishment of exile. Mishum hachi yotzu mimenu Yaakov ve'Esav. And that's the reason that from Yitzchak and Rivka came out the sons Yaakov and Esav. Mikol ma shekosuv beparosha atalomad, because you need to learn the whole parsha to understand what's really going on here and why things happened the way they did. Yaakov eino yochol leishev b'shalva, because Hashem did not want Yaakov to live in tranquility and comfort, machmas Esav, because of Esav. Esav from the start, from the womb, was there to challenge Yaakov and to quarrel with him and to contend with him. Lekayim diburo shel Avraham, and this fulfilled the statement, the request that Abraham made of Hashem, that the Jews would suffer golus and golios, but they would not suffer the punishment chas v'shalom of Gehenim. V'zehu ve'ela toldos Yitzchak, and this is why the pasuk says, and these are the generations of Yitzchak lefishahu ben Avraham, specifically because he was the son of Avraham. V'lo mishum de Rivka hayisa bas Rasha, and it has nothing to do with the idea that was suggested previously by other commentators that it's because Rivka was the daughter of a Rasha. That has no connection to the fact that Yitzchak and Rivka gave birth to Yaakov and Esav. Rather, it's based on the ideas that the Zera Shimshon has developed in this second half of the piece. So at this point, we hopefully can look back, even though there were lots of twists and turns and different pieces that had to be fit together. Hopefully we can look back and understand how the Zera Shimshon started with a little, very small, innocuous looking Rashi at the beginning of the Parsha, posed the question as to Rashi, why did Rashi feel he needed to say those words, and then developed a first approach, which again was complicated in his own right, and then when he finished with that, developed a second approach, which was, we might say, equally complicated, or certainly complicated in its own right, but hopefully we can see how each approach helped the Zera Shimshon go back and explain why Rashi said what he said on our first pasuk in the Parsha. Yasher koach to everyone for learning Zera Shimshon together tonight. We look forward, God willing, to learning Zera Shimshon again together on next week's Parsha.